Japan didn't open up to the rest of the world and have trade until late 1800s, 1860 onward. They didn't have printing presses the way we have printing presses in the West. So they didn't have commercially produced fabric. Everything was hand produced. It was a very competitive market. So anybody who could come up with something new and different in how to ornament your clothing would sell well. So that drove Shibori in Japan to become very diverse and very unique, and all these different techniques and styles developed because of that commercial aspect of it.
Welcome to Midlife Dialogues, where we are again talking to Anne Brooke. This channel is about embracing one's midlife and later, and Anne is a poster child for that. In part one of this series, we talked about how Anne planned ahead for her retirement, found a gorgeous piece of land in Hawaii, and built her dream home. Today, we're going to talk about her textiles journey. So first of all, Anne, your career was as a biologist. So what's all this interest in textiles? Tell us your background there.
It's an interesting background. As a kid, I really liked animals, and I had a lot of animals. I had snakes and hawks and chipmunks and squirrels and you name it. And I also liked doing things with my hands, making things. And by the time I got to high school, I'd taken a course in weaving, and I got a big old barn loom, and I took that barn loom with me to college. But I went to college to do science. I didn't like the biology teacher at the college that I was at, and I switched to doing art. I'm not a good graphic designer. I don't paint, but I do like weaving, and I'm pretty good at it. So I ended up spending a year in Finland, my junior year, and majoring in textile design in my college years. I spent 10 years being a weaver, doing production crafts. I had a fly shuttle loom, which is an old industrial type of loom. And then I made rugs as well, so a very heavy loom to make heavy rugs. And I got bored after 10 years of that. And I ended up starting to take science courses in college again. And then I ended up moving to Berkeley. And I got a job in the forestry department at University of California, putting out the mail in the front office and answering the phone. And I could take courses at University of California at Berkeley for free. So I went and took all the sort of undergraduate level courses that I didn't take in college. And I eventually quit the menial job and worked for graduate students. So I'd take courses at UC for a semester a year, and then I'd go do field work for graduate students. And that took me to a lot of places. I realized that if I wanted to go on and have a career in biology, that nobody would take me seriously when I'm an artist. So I looked for a project that I could do for a master's. And I found some bats in Costa Rica that turned out to be my bats. Yes, little bats, little white bats that live under leaves. They're called tent making bats. And I did a master's on that. And then I went on and did a PhD in bats that catch fish. And that took me to the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. I got a job in American Samoa as I graduated from the University of Tennessee. And that was the first time in a long time when I started again to have fun with textiles, because people in Samoa made baskets, and I bought a lot of baskets from them. And I began making quilts, little pieces of fabric. You can pick it up, you can take it with you. It doesn't require a big loom. And I made a lot of quilts. I sewed them by hand and I quilted them by hand. When I retired and I came to Hawaii to live, I began taking classes online, Zoom classes in Shibori, which is a Japanese technique of binding material and dyeing it. So you're sewing designs into fabric and you're dyeing it, and then what you've sewn becomes the pattern. Like everything, it's very simple, and you put it together over and over and over again, and it becomes very complex, and you can do some really interesting things. So that's how I got into textiles again. This past year, I've taken 2 workshops, 2 small classes in textiles doing Shibori in Japan, and I pulled a lot on my weaving background. It was very useful.
Tell us a little more about Shibori.
Shibori is a technique where you make patterns in cloth by doing things to it so that the dye won't dye everywhere. It's a resist. You resist the dye coming into the cloth. So you can do that by sewing it, by binding it up really tightly, by pleating it and binding it up really tightly, by putting sticks of wood on it and tying them really tightly, folding the cloth up in lots of different ways so you have repeatable patterns. It's easy to do initially, and it's quite technically challenging to do it repeatedly and to have it come out correct all the way down the line.
So you mean making the same pattern on one piece of fabric?
Yes. Yeah, you can make the pattern, but to make, yards and yards and yards of it is really difficult and takes a lot of practice. So, and it's just what I'm doing mostly with Shibori is I'm sewing, or I'm using a wrapping technique where you fold the cloth and you bind it up tightly, or you sew that tightly folded cloth, and you get patterns that you wouldn't imagine. It's quite magical. And it also means that you're dyeing. And traditionally in Japan, they use indigo. That's really where I started the whole thing with Shibori. I took a little weekend workshop here in Hawaii on indigo dyeing, and it was just magic. And I wanted to do more and more of it and try more of it. I took a number of online courses of various types and ways of doing indigo dyeing, but it's sort of unexpected. Indigo doesn't dye the material, it sits on top of the material. So you put your fabric in the dye pot and you pull it out and you oxidize it, and it turns from green to blue as it oxidizes. The more you do that, do dips and let them oxidize, the darker your cloth will be. So there's a real skill and an art to using indigo, which goes nicely with all the work that you do for Shibori. The other thing about indigo that's really fun, at least for me here, I can grow it in Hawaii, and I can produce the dye plant, the dye that I'm using for my fabric myself.
Are you growing indigo now?
Yes, I am.
And are you already using?
No, I'm not using it yet. I don't have enough to use yet. You harvest the leaves of the indigo plant and you let them decompose. I haven't gotten to that point yet of having enough leaves to decompose. From that decomposed leaves, you make your dye bath, and then it's more of a fermentation process and an oxygen reduction process.
Gardening, science, and art all together.
Right. Yeah. Perfect. Just what I wanted to do.
Yeah, it sounds just right up your alley. What is it that's so satisfying to you about these two things, about doing your own dyeing and about the Shibori method?
Well, I like to make things. My mother knit sweaters. My grandmother crocheted quilts. I don't know. I like to make things. I enjoy working with my hands. Some people like to play golf. That's working with your hands and your head in a different way. But you have to think about all these things. Shibori isn't just sewing. It's not necessarily intuitive what you're doing. It's a skill. And I like mastering that skill. I find that very enjoyable. And then you have a product that you can do something with. You can make it into clothing. You can make it into scarves and hats and quilts. There's endless things that you can do once you've made that fabric. It's not a quick way to make fabric or to pattern fabric, but what you get is really wonderful and it's quite unique.
Yeah, I find that really interesting. Did you tell me you're also having a loom built?
No, I'm not having a loom built. I'm having parts of a loom built, which I'll use to make Shibori. So looms make fabric. You take a warp and a weft and you put them together and you create fabric from string. This is something where I'll be using fabric that's stretched on rollers, and the rollers will just give me the option of using very long pieces of fabric and manipulating that fabric into pleats that can be dyed on the roller.
Oh, that's interesting. The way you describe Shibori sounds like tie-dye on steroids.
Yeah, tie-dye is a bad name for Shibori. It is tie-dye on steroids. It's a much more sophisticated and dedicated process than tie-dye. I think of tie-dye as, rainbow t-shirts. Shibori is not that at all. It's very specialized.
And last question, what do you see to come? Do you look into the future in terms of your textile projects, and do you see where you're going with that? Anything else on the horizon, or just more of the same?
Nope, nothing on the horizon. I'm enjoying what I'm doing. I'm trying to get good at it. It'd be nice to sell some things. I have no idea. And that's sort of how I approach all of these things. I have short-term goals when I can see them and reach them. I've got so many projects going on right now. It's going to take me quite a while to get through them. And by then there'll be more things I want to do. And I'll have created material that I'll need to do something with also. So I guess it just all rolls. One thing follows the next.
Yeah, it seems to be working for you. Thank you, Anne. Yes. I really liked hearing about this, and it's so neat to find someone who's really found their interests and really is able to dive deep into them and, figure out what they find so intriguing about it and make it happen and all of it. So thank you. That was really interesting. And thanks to everybody out there for watching Midlife Dialogues. This is part 2 of a 3-part series about Anne's story. So check for the other ones. Thanks for listening and see you next time.